We are live, we are live. So just give it a few moments for folks to arrive for this flex practice this evening. And we've got Izzy over here. I'll introduce her again in a few moments, but yeah, she'll be joining us to do demoing for the session. And look at us here, we're in lovely vein now. I don't know, have you been doing many sessions here before, Ferdy? It's really lovely, with this setup with the bricks and the Yogaground grey. And this was not planned, but we have toned ourselves in beautifully with the brickwork behind us. So the theme for this flex today is plasticity, and what the heck is plasticity? Good luck trying to type that one, Ferdinand. Plasticity, the very nature of plasticity. You could even just say creating space in the body, that's also fine. So for those people who are just tuning in on Instagram Live, for your session you might want to grab yourself at least a brick or something that you can use to maybe elevate yourself up onto. I can't see, if you don't have one of these, then you might want to improvise something softer, like a rolled up blanket might work. But if you don't have anything to hand, don't panic. You can pretty much adjust anything in this practice to fit the level of equipment that you have around yourself at this point. But we do have ourselves some lovely cork bricks. If you haven't already got one, invest in one. These things are fantastic. So in a few moments, I'll start the session. Yeah? Okay, so let's get started, everyone. So we're going to start by coming to a butterfly position. So for this, I'm going to actually use my brick here. I'm going to elevate my pelvis up and let my feet come out in front of me and give a little bit of a flexion to the feet and the legs to open up nice and wide. And we'll just let the legs adjust to this positioning whilst I introduce us to the theme of today. So the theme really is thinking about the plasticity of the connective tissue in our body. Now, don't be too intimidated by that word plasticity. I'll explain what that is. So the plasticity of the fascial system is different from, perhaps, what we might think of elasticity. So rather than pulling something and it twangs back into its lovely form, instead what we're doing is we're putting a gentle and sustained pressure or stress into that tissue, so that over time, the fascial tissue, because of its collagenous makeup, it adjusts its shape. It starts to allow itself to readjust its form so that we can find a little bit more space into our bodies. And I was trying to tie this in with the theme of the current period around now as we're heading into Liberation Day tomorrow. So thinking about perhaps in your bodies, how can we create a sensation of liberation or freedom into the body? Okay, so for our lovely butterfly position, make sure that your spine is nice and upright, that we have those sitting bones spilling over the edges of whatever you're using to perhaps lift your pelvis, but not being too concerned. If you don't have something, then let your legs come a little further out in front of you. Maybe that helps you out a little bit. Then let's bring the hands down onto the floor. Close your eyes and let's take our focus into sensation. So a very different kind of practice perhaps from thinking about the exterior of the body in form when we have perhaps in more of our other yoga practices. In a flex practice, we're really utilizing the sensation, the ability to feel those subtle changes in the tissues of the body. So as we start to perhaps pitch the spine forward and give that gentle tip of the body forwards, how do we feel that the body responds to that sensation? Now, to really start to explore this idea of plasticity, we don't want to be going into the depth of a stretch straight away. Instead, what we're doing is we're introducing the tissue of the connective tissue, the fascia, to the sensation. So only go as far as you start to feel that little bit of resistance or of pulling. Now, perhaps your hands can actually hurdle over your ankles, and we can bring those fingertips towards the floor. If you do have the capacity for that, perhaps they even creep a little further forward. But again, reminding ourselves not to overshoot, to overstretch, but instead just place enough stimulus into the tissue that we start to recognize change. And by working a little softer, a little slower, we can actually access a much deeper level of release into the body. So as you're tuning into your butterfly position here, where is it that you start to feel the sensation of release? For some of us, you may feel it into the lower parts of the spine. You may feel it running down the hamstrings, the backs of the legs, perhaps running around the pelvis on the outer edges and around the buttock area. So just notice where that sensation of resistance lies in your tissue and just observe it. So our flex practice, sometimes referred to as a yin yoga practice, we're exploring that aspect of our physical practice here by observing change, not by trying to enforce it, which we might do in a more dynamic kind of practice. So we're sustaining these positions for a little bit more of an elongated period of time and just noticing those gradual changes. The feeling that perhaps you're going for in these tissues is one of melting. If you imagine that the collagenous tissue of your fascia, that matrix that connects up the entirety of your body, is like wax, like candle wax. And as we place a little bit of heat onto that candle wax through friction, through sliding and movement, or in this case, pressure and stress, we start to feel that tissue melt, and we gain access to a greater freedom of movement to come forwards. So perhaps as we are continuing, you might really want to adjust those arm structures so you can lean into them. Perhaps as Izzy's demoing over there, she can go down onto her forearm structures. That's also nice. You may even wish to start drifting the sensation of pull up the spine by allowing a rounding to the back. And your head may just become that little bit heavier, and it starts to melt away from that skeletal structure of your spine. And as we round the back, we often start to feel a greater distribution across that full back line of the torso. So from perhaps where we might have initially been feeling sensation around the pelvis and the upper legs, you may now be starting to feel a change around the mid-spine, around the shoulders, perhaps even a release around the jaw. And just noticing those very subtle changes. In regards to our breathing through a flex practice, we're not needing to control it or restrict the breathing. Again, it's that opportunity of observance, just watching how the breath moves through the body in this position, in this form of our bodies. With this roundedness, it perhaps gives us a little access here to breathe into the back body. So really allowing also that belly area of the body within this feeling of compression, rather than pulling belly inwards to support spine, just allow your belly to expand naturally with your breathing. And slowly we're going to begin the exit from this position. Now be careful of just bringing yourself back up to a seated position. Let's first of all think about the palms of the hands. Bring those palms down and start to energize by pushing down into those palms. And as you push down into the palms, feel perhaps that slightly slidey nature of the tissue on the palmar surface of your hands. So underneath the fingertips, underneath the knuckles, underneath the hands. And you might even just give yourself a little push forwards and backwards. It's a very small movement, so it might not read so well on a camera. But just that little movement of pushing forwards and backwards into the hands, and feel perhaps even with a gentle drag of the hands or a push of the hands, how that changes the sensation of tension in the lower parts of spine. Perhaps it reaches even down into the legs. And then gradually just moving the weight from one hand to the other and using that rocking action to help bring the hands back towards the ankles, step those hands over your ankles, and then beginning to bring yourself back up to a seated position. As you approach vertical, just let your eyelids become heavy and sink down. Let the eyes close. And just give yourself that opportunity to feel the spine quite weightless in this vertical positioning, the legs falling away, and just reassess this with where the sensation was in the tissue when you began. Do we already begin to feel that subtle change? That sensation that perhaps there is a bit more freedom and space into the back body. Now from here, bring your hands behind yourself and just gently tip yourself back. Let that tipping back alleviate the weight from the legs there so we can bring the legs together. And you might want to just place the feet onto the floor for a moment and maybe just swipe the inside lines of your legs together, like you're just trying to rub a little bit the inside edges of the knees and mid-calves. And that's just going to oil a little bit into your pelvis and into your lower back. You may want to just remain seated on your brick here for that. It's perfectly fine. You may want to drop away from it if it feels a bit unstable. And we're going to now alter this position to come into a wide position, a straddled position. So I'm going to let the legs open up. Now here I'm lucky I have this lovely T-shaped mat structure, but if you're like Izzy, you might want to turn yourself sideways on your mat so your heels are comfortably on the mat. If you're happy with that and you're maybe got some kind of cushioning underneath the ankles, that's perfectly fine as well. But I'm going to open up the legs to a comfortable width apart, not needing to force myself open. I'm going to draw the toes back, and that already is starting to send a sensation of space and elongation into the back of the legs. Now, I again am sitting myself up onto a brick. You might want to do that, or you may prefer, like Izzy, she's quite mobile in the hips, so she's going to remain sitting on the floor. And again, we're just letting those fingertips find the floor, drawing the toes back, so still working relatively active into the front surface of the legs. And we're just going to move our way forward. And again, you might close the eyes, descend yourself into your body, into sensation. Where is it you start to feel a sensation of pull, of resistance? So it's not necessarily that it stops my body from coming forward, but immediately I'm starting to feel perhaps a resistance on the inner thighs. I feel a gentle pull. Perhaps you feel it maybe into the spine somewhere, into the buttocks. You may even feel it into your calf muscles, if that's an area of tightness. So these chains of fascia run through the entirety of our bodies. So don't be surprised if there is a moment where you find that suddenly there is an attention drawn to a very distant part of your body that you wouldn't associate with this movement. And I'm just going to gently introduce the body and the tissues to changing sensations. So maybe with this coming forwards, there is the capacity to come to forearms. Maybe I'm just keeping arms lengthened out into space and I'm just leaning into those arms. But keep those toes still drawing upwards. Perhaps a misconception might be about a yin yoga practice or our flex practice is that we need to be super passive. But sometimes, here what we're doing is working with a principle called reciprocal inhibition. I'm engaging the front of the leg or shortening it to be able to create an elongation into the back line. And you may even wish to explore moving or pulsating between that feeling, just drawing the toes a little further back and then releasing a bit, drawing the toes a little further back. That little bit of movement might actually encourage a change into your myofascial system. So I'm exploring this gentle tip forward, keeping my focus inwards. Of course, if you ever need to open the eyes to refer to the video, then that's perfectly fine. But see if you can just enjoy the freedom that comes from really taking your focus into your body. Noticing perhaps those very subtle changes. It might not be that it's a quite grand experience for you. It may be very subtle. It may be that the body's quite resilient to change. At this period in time, a lot of us may be spending elongated periods of time sat or in more static positions. So here in this practice, we're trying to gradually break down the fibrous bonds and the adhesions, the gluiness of these tissues that stick together. So we're trying to almost break that down, melt our way to find a bit more freedom for movement, for gliding. And feel free to adjust the positioning of your head. You can see perhaps if you are looking at the video as he's now resting one side of her head onto the floor, maybe that you prefer to keep the forehead down, and maybe even rest your head onto a brick or a structure. Another lovely option if you're midway is to let the elbows rest and just let your eyes fall into the palms of your hands. So it looks a bit like you're crying. But it's actually a moment really where you can just surrender into that sensation. And if you are feeling congested in the nose area, that's actually a really useful sensation, is to press the heels of the hands into that area just below the eyes and widen that area. You can give quite a nice release for any blocked sinuses. And as I start to feel the gradual change into this tissue, we're going to start to energize the body to begin the exit. So I'm going to start by finding a position where the palms can find the floor. I'm going to gently press into the palms, lengthening the arms. And as you do that, particularly in this position, just take a little bit of movement in the shoulder girdle, lifting one shoulder away from the back of the pelvis. And just feel what that sensation is into your lower parts of the back. So often these areas, these latissimus muscles coming down from the shoulders often get a little bit sticky, a little bit gluey. So here we're trying to just move into those areas, create that little bit more mobility. And then gradually walking the hands back towards the pelvis. If you were seated on a brick and you've fallen away from it, don't worry. If you're climbing back up onto a brick, then do that nice and steady. Just bring yourself back up to vertical. Let your eyelids again become heavy if they've opened. And just feel for the change. What is the shifting that we're starting to create in the body within these postures? Then allow your eyes to perhaps open up here. I'm going to drop away from my brick now, move that aside somewhere, lean back into your hands, soften your elbows and use that tipping to help draw the legs up. And again, let the feet rest. Maybe here again, taking that little bit of painting of the inner thighs, of the inner calves, dropping the legs. So we refer to this often as windscreen wiper legs. So it looks a bit like I'm going for a windscreen wiper action, but I'm going for a windscreen wiper on a very small car. One of these little Lev cars that's driving around a lot at the moment. So we've got this little movement here, wiping the mini windscreen of our mini car. And then we're going to come into a half butterfly position. So for this, I'm going to lengthen out here. I'm going to open out one side. I'm going to go here with my right. It may look like the left on the camera, so try not to get too confused there. And I'm going to position this other leg out in front of me in a nice comfortable position. For some people, so that this is for my anatomy, to feel comfortable here. But for some people, as you can see with Izzy there, she's mobile in the hips, so bringing the leg in and letting the knee drop down may feel much more comfortable for her hips. So feel free to adjust that position. It may be out here, it may be somewhere in between on that journey. If you're somewhere in the mid-level, flex the foot a bit, and that's going to help to protect that ankle area. Now I'm also going to draw back the toes here on the extended leg, my right leg here, and I'm going to bring my my right fingers out towards that right side. And I'm just going to start to lean towards the side. Now my other hand here, my left hand, is going to find the inner thigh. And just let your hand sink into the tissue for a moment and glide it around the bone. So not thinking about moving your tights or your skin or your trousers, but I'm sinking into the skin and a few layers beneath the skin, and I'm just spreading it, like I'm smearing it around on the bone. And you're oiling a little bit into that tissue. Then what you're going to do is sink into that tissue and slide it around the front surface of the thigh bone as you allow yourself to press into that hand and lean across to the right or towards the extended leg. And I'm searching here for that feeling of spaciousness into the left lower spine. Now, if you've gone for the left leg lengthened at this point, you'll be feeling the right lower spine. And just feeling that very subtle, gradual change. So often in this sideways bending, the focus goes to get the forehead towards the shin. But today, let's think more about the creation of space rather than the depth of a stretch or of a shape. So I'm thinking here about creating space in between that left side of my ribs and my pelvis, and the thigh bone and the pelvis, so opening into that hip joint. Lots of tightness in lower spines are associated with tightness in hips. Those two areas are really intertwined. So their relationship is very close. So here I'm opening up space into that hip and finding a bit more freedom. Now, whilst you're going for this sideways movement, you might also want to explore a positioning of your neck, shoulders, and skull to let yourself distribute tightness around that area. So maybe letting your ear move away from the shoulder. Maybe your shoulder blade slides a bit down your spine. Maybe your chin rolls into chest or up to sky. So there's a multitude of combinations that you can go with there. Just go with whatever your body is telling you to do. Where does it feel fantastic to create that little bit more space and freedom? I'm still drawing back the toes, so I have an active movement into the front surface of the legs, whilst I'm creating space into the back surface. The abdominals at this point can still be released. If you're pulling in, if you're holding yourself stable, just let yourself go a little bit. Let that front abdominal area soften, and just let yourself breathe into that abdomen area. So perhaps now we start to feel that subtle change, that melting around the lower part of the spine. Very subtle change, but one that's really not, we can't miss it, the feeling where it starts to melt. It's a wonderful feeling where you start to just ease into movement. And we often mistake that sensation for trying to rip space into the body, for trying to tear our way through connections in the body. But instead, if we just work a little slower, a little deeper, we get that effect from the plasticity of the tissue, that it starts to adjust to this new space. And then gradually from here, what we're going to do is just ease the weight away from that right hand. So I'm going to start bringing the body back. I'm maybe going to crawl the fingers to the thumbs like a caterpillar just to help bring myself up. And then just bring yourself to sitting, lean back, fall away, and bend those knees. Let the feet just find the floor, and we take windscreen wipers again. As you're taking windscreen wipers, make sure we still keep a relatively proud chest, but we're not curving really inwards. Still got nice spacious chest. And then we're going to change this over to the other side. So I'm going to let my opposite leg, my left leg now open out, drawing my right heel in towards the groin area. Now, if this feels right, then go for this. But again, we might want to adjust that position. So for myself, with deep set hips, it feels much better to let this leg escape out in front. And it gives me a much greater sensation of freedom of lifting out from the waist. So I'm going to start then by leaning out onto those left fingertips. I like to go for 10 fingers, so it just gives me a feeling of elevation rather than too much grounding, but depends on what you want to go through in your practice. You maybe want to feel that sensation of lightness. Perhaps we want to connect more into our bodies if we feel quite distant in the head. So I'm going to use my right hand here, just sink it into the tissue and manipulate. So feel free to just slide it around and really feel that slippy nature of the soft tissues on the bone. So we're not just one big concrete slab. We've actually got these many different textures in the body that when we gently pull, there is a continual drag into the tissue. And we can feel those moments where the binding of those tissues create that tension, that little bit of pull. And that's what we're searching for there. And that's a pull into those myofascial connections, that fascial system connecting the body up. And I'm thinking of pressing now down through my skeleton of sitting bones, and I'm just leaning into that left hand. And I'm finding my way into a sideways movement, still drawing back the toes there, so make sure those legs are still very much alive. And it's a subtle movement. It doesn't need to be a very deep stretch. It's not necessarily a Janusirsasana. So a different kind of posture from a more dynamic practices where we might be thinking about lifting out and falling into that front leg. But here we're gliding out into space and feeling for that moment where the tissues just melt a little bit. That they give us that sensation of perhaps being pulled over the edge of a waterfall to cascade into this sideways bend. And as we're continuing this movement, how about we draw our attention into that right side of the neck and shoulder? What's the best relationship for those areas of your body right now? It may be that you want to really drop that right shoulder forwards and relax into the neck. That can give you some relief, perhaps down into the right side body. Perhaps opening up the chest if we've had a lot of desk-based work, if we're tight at the moment in the chest, just drawing the shoulder down the back and perhaps lifting the chin a little bit is a lovely way of coming into these scalene muscle areas around the front and side surfaces of the neck. So where is it that your body sings in response to the position? A lovely movement is to just also pass your skull between a tipping forwards and lifting nose away from breastbone. So depending on where your head is tilted, just try moving it like you're nodding yes. And that very word yes is a yes to let go, a yes to find some space into this tensional network of your body, the fascia. And you're just feeling how very slow and soft, subtle movements could be very small, could be very large, but notice how they give change. And I'm going to start to tune my way in here again into the surface of that left hand on the floor. Unless, of course, you're working with your right leg extended now. Then it will be your right palm. But whichever palm is currently pressing into the ground, see if you can focus in on that area. Press it a little stronger. Start to fire up that arm, that it becomes stronger. And we find that lift out from the arm. Gradually draw the fingers towards the heel of the hand, and as you push the fingers in, you start to feel that you can push yourself away from the floor to come back up, perhaps even using the hand to help bring the head back up to vertical. Bring your hands behind yourself, fall back. Draw the legs in, take a moment to let those feet rest, and take those mini windscreen wipers. Perhaps your windscreen now wants to turn into a bigger Jeep, or a Mercedes, or some larger vehicle, a lorry perhaps. And you're wiping off the splattered insects from your lorry windscreen. And we're just moving ourselves, internal rotation and external rotation of those hips. A lovely method as well there. If you do wake up in the morning, you have issues in the lower spine, this simple movement is a great way to oil into the lower back and the hips. Like I said, those two areas are deeply associated with that tightness. So this movement can be something really valuable if you do feel a lot of tightness in the back. Now, from here, just shift your pelvis back a little bit, lean off to one side, bring yourself towards all fours. We're going to move into a bit of lunging. So I'm just finding a nice comfortable position here. Take a momentary mini version of cat and cow, just tipping a little bit of the pelvis. So you feel a bit of movement and rounding into the spine. And as you take your next little curvature, use that little curve and affirming into the center to step your right foot forward. And just step that foot to the outer edge of your hand, coming towards what we might refer to as a lizard position or a baby dragon. So I'm sinking into this front foot, making sure I've got nice distributed toes, bringing my hands perhaps a little further out, and I'm just introducing myself to this lunge. My pelvis can sink. Temptation really is here to push very hard and take a deep stretch. I'm going to try and urge you, take a step back, keep some weight and pressure going through those hands, and just slowly introduce your pelvis to falling into that hammock structure. Were I to just maybe turn a little bit more flat to the camera, you can maybe see that hammock or sling structure between those two knees, and I'm just going to fall into that hammock. You might even take a bit of movement of rocking the pelvis a little deeper into that hammock and a little bit out of the hammock. But you're just introducing yourself to this movement. So it may be that the tension resides in the back surfaces of your right leg. It may be in the front of your left. It may be somewhere in between. There's a spiral line of connection that comes through those inner thighs into the spine. So just notice perhaps where you feel the resistance, and then we'll perhaps start to settle. So find yourself into a position of stress, into this position where we start to just settle ourselves. Now maybe, as we settle, you might even let your forearms find the ground. Now if they don't find the ground, it may be that using your brick structure underneath the forearms can just elevate the floor enough to make that feel a little more achievable. But there is no goal within this movement. If you're still up onto your hands with elongated arms, that is nonetheless still a very valid position to be in. So don't feel the need to get down here. The most important part of this exploration is sensation. So wherever you feel that mild, gentle pull into your tensional structure, you stay there. Close your eyes. Descend into feeling, and you just focus in on those areas that gather your attention. How do you feel it start to alter? And be patient in waiting for that change. It may take time. Fascial tissue in its very nature, when you're working on it as a therapist, you'll find that around 30 to 40 seconds is where we start to feel a gentle melting action. So round about in the next 10 seconds, we start to feel that subtle change where we can perhaps sink a bit further. And be very careful of that moment where we feel the change, that we don't then sink too soon. You keep allowing yourself to sink, like you are perhaps sinking into quicksand. We don't try and push our way into the quicksand, we just allow it to absorb us into this movement. And just gradually easing. Noticing perhaps as you melt into this structure, there is a natural desire to allow that right leg to perhaps fall out into a bit of external rotation. Now that's perfectly fine. If you wish to explore that, just give a little bit of flexion to the right ankle and toes, and that's going to help protect these outer surfaces of the lower leg and the ankle. It's often an area where if we weaken this, we tend to get a lot of sprained ankles and injuries. So make sure you give yourself a good structural brace around that lower leg and ankle area. And just noticing where it is again, geographically in your body. Where is it that you find the greatest tension? And don't worry if that does change, if it moves. The sensation of release may begin in the hamstring, but as it starts to loosen, and this is the very nature of connective tissue, is that it moves its way from that hamstring area, the back of the leg, to suddenly the inner thighs, to perhaps suddenly wrapping around the back of the pelvis. And you may even feel how that then starts to release the tension from the lower parts of the spine. And now gradually from here, what I'm going to start to do is bring the hands back down towards the floor. So those palms are going to find their way into the ground. I'm going to gently start pressing into the palms to lift the depth of stress from the posture. So take your time, and as you ease out, like you are withdrawing your hand perhaps from a pot of honey, and you just feel that stringy honey fall away from your fingers, and you feel that fall away from the bones and beneath the layers of skin. I'm going to move the brick aside for a moment, and I'm going to lean the weight back into that left leg so I can just step that right leg back. And be very gentle with that movement, and take a few movements here. So it may be, what I'm doing here is I'm actually creating circles of my shoulders over the wrists in one direction, maybe the other. It may be that you prefer to just move forwards and backwards into your hips. It may be a cat and cow again, just a little movement of the spine and around the hip mobility. So feel free, go with your instinct, trust what your body's kind of telling you to do. And then we're going to move this onto the other side. So I'm going to lean into that right hand. I'm going to take a little bit of a curvature of the spine to firm and lift the abdomen, and that helps me step that left foot forward. And you can see here I've got a nice wide lunge position. And I'm going to start that movement forwards and backwards perhaps, just gently easing forwards into that hammock between the thighs and back again. It may be that if you're going with this movement and you find that actually for you the position wants to be a bit narrower and you bring the foot in, that's also perfectly fine. Particularly for those who are perhaps more tight in the hamstring area or perhaps are very loose in external rotation, then you might prefer to actually explore a bit more closeness towards that center line. But I'm just moving myself forwards and backwards, introducing myself to this position. You may find that naturally, as you take this second side, that your body already is in a state of adjustment. And that's again referring back to that idea of plasticity, that the connective tissue is not just on one side of the body. So as I've released into that right lunge, it's already affecting this left lunge. So I'm then going to start coming forwards and settling into a position that carries my intrigue. And then I'm maybe going to walk my hands a bit further forwards and start feeling that melting around that left hip, that honey feeling, or perhaps warm Nutella, or warm duopanotti. Is that the duopanotti? Is that the word? Is it duopanotti? The lovely spread for we have. So I'm going to start melting into this position. Maybe I'm going to find my way onto my forearms if I have the capacity. Maybe again, I'm going to come up onto the bricks and be ready for the body to be different. It may be slightly tighter on this side. It may be, following your previous work on the other side, it may be that this side is now much looser. So go to where you find again that sensation of pull, of gentle tension. In a yin yoga practice, you often refer to that as the edge, that borderline between comfort and discomfort. And noticing those two terms, comfort and discomfort, not really going anywhere near the zone of pain. So I'm just wanting to explore sensation. And that sensation is one of a fuzziness. Often fascia is referred to as a fuzz. So we find that fuzzy feeling, a melting of this waxy structure that connects and coats all these various tissues in the body. And I'm going to start to fall. Perhaps if you do feel that capacity to allow a bit of external rotation, you can see there my left knee just melting out towards the side, and that maybe feels natural for some people. If it doesn't feel natural, you don't go there. You just go where the body carries you. This practice is one of observance, not of enforcing or trying to design or redesign our bodies. It's an investigation into our anatomy, into that tensional network, that matrix that makes up the connective tissues. And I'm waiting again for that moment where I start to feel that melt, that subtle sensation, a warming sensation. Often when you work into fascia with myofascial therapy or release-based work, the sensation tends to be one of burning or of melting. So we're just easing our way into this position. Noticing also your breath quality. Is your breath restricted by the posture? If you're finding that, then perhaps we maybe can adjust the position. It's important really to maintain your steady, natural ability to breathe. And slowly I'm going to bring those hands back again underneath the chest. And I find the palm structures. I'm pushing down, feeling that squidgy nature of the molten duodenum beneath my palms. And I'm going to move myself back towards my right knee and shin. And just let that left leg circle around, bending at the knees. And again, I might choose just a little bit of movement. Little circular actions are often much more welcomed by the body than angles. So I'm just going to take some lovely circles, perhaps wave movements through the spine. Feel free to let yourself explore your inner dancer for a few moments. And where we're going to come to from here is now a stress into the spine, actually a compression into the lower part of the back. So I'm going to move my bricks aside so I can come onto the front surface. And just let yourself come forward, firm into the abdomen here on this descent. So you are still protecting your spine as you find your way onto the front. And we're coming into a Sphinx position. So for me, I often like tucking the toes underneath for this Sphinx position. For some people, maybe it's nicer to just let the toes untuck. But I like to add in that little bit of a gentle stress on the underside of the feet. And you'll feel that perhaps there is a tensile connection between the bottoms of the feet and around the pelvis if you work with it. But that's just a personal thing for myself. So I'm going to start by firming into the abdomen again, just to support the spine as I take the arch. I'm lifting up and I'm throwing those forearms forward into the floor. I'm going to now work active, push the the elbows down into the floor. And maybe even just resting those fingertips. I'm maybe playing my invisible harpsichord or my piano underneath my fingers, but I'm pressing through those elbows, and that's engaging into the chest. You'll feel your pectorals switch on, maybe your serratus anterior muscles. And what I'm trying to do is then switch off a little bit around the lower parts of the spine to let the spine descend. Now, for some of us, if we're quite mobile, if we're quite at ease in the tensions around the lower back, this position might feel very passive. And so you might prefer to level it up slightly by widening those hands and pressing into the palms and lifting the elbows. Now that is a much greater increased amount of compression into the lower spine. So be super careful that we're not overstressing the lower back. But I'm giving myself lots of pressure through those arms. I'm keeping the shoulder blades moving around the sides and the front of the rib cage. And that is keeping me active in this position. So not a completely passive practice in a flex practice, but finding a way to balance that activity through the arms versus that softness and passive nature around the spine where I can then compress a little into the vertebra. Now, this idea of plasticity again, I'm placing a stress into that compression so that it starts to adjust and allow a sliding. So the idea of compression, slightly different from that of a stretch or of a pull or a lengthening sensation. I'm actually starting to put the pressure of those vertebral discs through the spine to try and release a bit of the fluidity that lies in those intervertebral discs. And I'm observing that melting. You may find that your spine is starting to cascade. Imagining if you were to melt the concrete that holds the various stones of the Tower of Pisa, and you're just letting it gradually fall. And the whole world is underwater, so the Tower of Pisa falls with a sense of resistance and grace, rather than tumbling like heavy stone. And we're feeling that melt as we fall to the ground. Close your eyes if you haven't already and just dive into that sensation, that melting of your vertebra, that melting of your spine. Now, if you're in your seal position, which is this elongated arm extension, I'm going to start to allow the arms to bend, and you'll feel that transition into the tension of the backs of your arms. You'll feel the triceps start to get involved. Use them to help slowly sink your elbows into the floor. Then I'm going to bring those palms a little bit closer and into the body so I can start pushing myself back up a little higher, momentary lift back up, and then melt down. Bring your hands underneath your shoulders, around the sides of the ribs. Now again, firm into the abdomen. Very important that you do that bit of firming. You put a lot of pressure and release through the spine. So you want to give it some good structural support. Come back up, hinge backwards, and then we're going to swing the legs around towards the front. So as I swing the legs around to the front, I'm going to actually come to the side here for this, so then I'm not too much facing away from you guys. I'm going to come down onto the back surface, let the arms come out towards the side, and I'm going to actually come to more of a cactus position for a spinal twist. I'm going to draw the knees up towards the chest, and we're going to go over towards that left-hand side. So I'm going to start by just lifting, using the abdomen, lift the back of the pelvis out from the floor, and then let that left side of your body fall towards the ground. And you're just easing yourself into that twist. Now really see if you can bring your knees really close up towards your armpit there. The more you do that, the greater the sensation of rounding through the spine. And that rounding of your back is quite essential with distributing that twist right the way up the spine. If we keep it a little bit arched or the knees too low, it tends to sit much tighter around the lower vertebra. And we want to really distribute that spinal twist. So just notice again your initial response to this. And you can see this beautifully modeled here from Izzy. Maybe you want to even rotate the head in the opposite direction. Now, if you're finding that difficult, if your head doesn't want to twist in the opposite direction, perhaps there is a tightness around that upper part of your spine. So in which case, go with the same direction of your legs and see if you can let your vertebra completely release. Let go of the musculature. So we're not holding the nose directly up to the sky. Take it in either direction and really let the tissues soften. Let your head become heavier and fall into the ground. Then tune into the opposition shoulder. So if your legs are out to that left side, feel into your right shoulder. And around that shoulder to chest connection, can you feel the pectoral releasing? Now stay tuned in to that pectoral area. Start to slide your right fingers overhead. And you're taking it in one slow circle to meet your left hand. So it's coming over the top nice and slow. Curl yourself up. Now use your little embryo, your little fetus position to help roll yourself onto your back. Bring yourself back onto your back surface. And then we're going to let the arms come again back out into your cactus position. And we're going to let the knees now come out towards the right. Just ease yourself onto the right. Lift up your knees a bit higher. And then search out towards that left side with your left arm. Give yourself some space. Tune in to where the neck needs to be positioned to feel a greater sensation of release. Perhaps it's spiraling towards the legs. Perhaps it's spiraling away. And as you make your selection for where to place your neck and your skull, tune in again to that chest, that space between your breastbone and your arm. Can you open up space into those tissues? A gentle fascial pull all the way out to the tips of your left fingers. And you feel how that gentle release of tension along that spiral line on your front surface starts to perhaps adjust the tension running into your neck and into the skull. So all those tissues connect together. So if we start to create that sensation of release, where is it you start to feel the benefit of that change? Where do you feel that liberation in your body from the gentle tensional release? Now tune into your left fingers. We're going to start to search further out, thinking about tracing a circle beyond that which you can reach with your fingertips, all the way over towards that right side. Curl up into your little embryo fetal position, roll onto your back surface. Come onto your back, let your feet find the floor, let your arms come down by the sides. We're going to start sinking into our relaxation. Just let your arms become heavier. Now, as we're thinking about liberating, creating space into the body, let your arms go wider than you initially set them. Give yourself a bit more freedom. Now, tune in here. Does the spine feel comfortable here? If it feels comfortable, feel free to remain here. If you feel that there is a greater need for some space, let your legs extend and let them come out into your full Shavasana position. If your legs extend, take them wider. Be bold, be brave, and give yourself some space here to feel that release. Notice where your habitual position of Shavasana was, and how does it feel to perhaps take that greater step into the unknown to give yourself a little bit more feeling of freedom. Tune in, let your breath be soft. Feel the gentle rise and fall of your chest, of your belly. Can you feel how that subtle movement of your breath not only affects that central area of the body, but finds its way out right to the tips of your fingers and toes and the crown of your head? And feel free to remain in this position, to continue your practice for longer than perhaps our live feed or perhaps the recording that you find on the website. But just give yourself that space. But if you'd like to join me in bringing the practice to a close, gently start wiggling those distant fingers and toes. Allow your head to take a gentle tip from side to side. Take a stretch, reach yourself out, be bigger than you could possibly be. Roll onto your favorite side and choose your favorite. And then find your way back up to a comfortable seated position. And as you bring yourself back to your comfortable seated position, feel free to lift yourself up onto a brick. Feel free to just sit yourself into whatever position feels most comfortable for you, where you can distribute tension equally through your body. Lay your hands rest down onto your thighs for a few moments. Keep your eyes closed. Just tune in. How does the body feel different from where you began? How do we feel that sensation of space, of freedom, of liberation? How has tuning into that plasticity of your body helped you gain that sensation of freedom? And then bring your hands together in front of your heart, and let's thank yourselves for your practice. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you, Isabel, for joining me in demoing. And have a very lovely day or evening ahead of you.